Hi, BC family. Welcome to your midweek devotion. So last week I talked a lot about John 15, where Jesus said, "If you abide in me, dwell in me, and my words in you, then you will bear much fruit." Abiding in him, inviting him with you every day, and developing a relationship with him and maintaining that living connection with him is so imperative. So today I want to talk about John 15, verse 11. It says, "These things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full." So what makes our joy full? Abiding in the vine. Those were the verses before, right? Keeping that constant communication with him. Colossians 2:7 also echoes this. It demonstrates how joy, the fruit of the Spirit joy, not happiness. Happiness is fleeting. Happiness is a worldly emotion. Joy that comes from God. Joy is what you can have and walk in the midst of grief and despair. In the midst of the unthinkable, you can still have joy. That's the type of joy I'm talking about. So in Colossians 2:7 it says, "See that you go on growing in the Lord and become strong and vigorous in the truth you were taught. Let our lives overflow with joy." Our lives overflow with joy when we continue to grow in the Lord and become stronger in the truth of his word. That's what that verse just said. Psalm 16:11 says, "In his presence is the fullness of joy." When we are abiding, dwelling with him, that is where the fullness of the joy is, when we're in his presence. Joy is a strong spiritual force. Nehemiah 8:10 says, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." Joy can be your strength. That means when your circumstances are not good, when you're in the midst of a storm, swallowed up by grief and anger and fear and anxiety and stress and uncertainty, you don't have to feel miserable and depressed and barely able to function. No, you can tap into your strength. When you are maintaining your union with the Lord, abiding in him, then joy will begin to bubble up out of you. The joy will give you strength to keep on walking in faith, to stand your ground, to keep your head held high until you see your problem solved, until you see victory, until you see the promise come to pass. That's the joy, the strength that the fruit of the Spirit is. So I was recently listening to this song by King and Country called Joy, and the lyrics hold so much truth to it. So I want to tell you these lyrics. It says, "Gotta get that fire back in my bones before my heart turns to stone. Oh, hear my prayer tonight, 'cause this is do or die. The time has come to make a choice, and I choose joy." So dissecting those lyrics really quick, the fire back in their bones, that's joy. They're saying, gotta get that joy back inside of me. Why? Why is it so imperative to bring that back? Because if you don't, then your heart turns what? It becomes stone. How? Because hatred and bitterness and depression begins to set in when you aren't abiding in him. When the joy isn't there to give you that strength to overcome, then the weight of the world and the cares of the world press into your heart and into your life, right? The lyrics go on to say, this is do or die. I mean, that seems pretty, wow, black and white, this is do or die. Is it really? Well, it is. So it says this is do or die. Why? Because in order to have the strength to keep your faith, the strength to stand your ground, the strength to believe God rather than everything you see in reality, then you have to make that choice. The choice has to be made that you're going to choose joy despite what you're in. So I was recently watching a TV show it's called Obi-Wan Kenobi, I'm pretty sure. And there was a moment during an episode where I really saw this come to light. So if you know anything about Star Wars, or maybe you don't, you know that Anakin was a Jedi, a good person, but over the course of his life, he became Darth Vader, one of the most evil villains. In one episode in particular, Anakin tells Obi-Wan Kenobi, he says, "You didn't kill Anakin, I did. What did he mean by that? He meant he himself let his anger, his offense, his bitterness, the bad, he let that into his atmosphere. That's what he focused on, what he fed on. And in turn, it turned his heart into stone. He became that person by his choices, right? And in another scene, we have Obi-Wan and Anakin, Darth Vader, they're fighting. And Anakin has put all these boulders on top of Obi-Wan. So he's being crushed by boulders, and he's trying his best to keep the rocks from crushing him. But in that moment, you're hearing his inner thoughts, and you're hearing, and so he is having his inner thoughts. He's hearing his failures, his fears, his anger, his grief. That's what you're hearing swirling around, plaguing his mind. And as he's listening to these inner thoughts, the rocks are beginning to crush him. He has no strength. He doesn't have the power to lift them off because he's focused on the darkness that is now enveloping him. And that's the way of the world, right? When we let all the thoughts in, it begins to weigh on us, crushing us. And in that moment, we have a choice. That's that do or die part of the lyrics. Obi-Wan had a choice. And suddenly, in the midst of that, he made that choice. He began thinking on things that brought him joy. A good report. He started thinking on the ones he loved and the people that were still alive and still remained. And he started thinking about things that brought joy into his heart and joy into his life, right? And he was changing his thoughts and choosing joy. And in that moment, the pressure of the rocks began to lift. You could suddenly start to see them lift. And he was able, after a certain amount of time, to toss the weight off of him and climb out of the pit he was in. Much the same way, when we make the choice to choose joy, to think on those things that are lovely, true, of a good report, we throw the weight of the world off, and we are able to climb out of the pit of grief, of despair, of anger, of bitterness, of fear, and we're able to move forward into our victory. The joy of the Lord is our strength. Obi-Wan received strength when he focused on the joy. That's when he was able to have that force that got the weight of the evil and the weight of those boulders off of him, right? When we bear the fruit of joy, because we are abiding in the vine, we receive strength, strength to overcome, strength to, having done all to stand, stand. Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. If we think about problems, sad things, negative things, then it adversely affects the release of joy. Anakin constantly thought about the problems, about the how comes, about the it's not fair, and he became darker and darker. He stopped abiding in the vine, so to say, right? Instead of spending time with Obi-Wan and the Jedis, he began to focus on the world, the world's ways, and what the world says was power to overcome. And it didn't go well for him. So this week, remember that joy is a force. It's a strong force of the Spirit. It comes to lift you up when things weigh you down. It is in you. When we're saved, we have it in us, and it manifests when we are abiding in Him. So continue this week to abide in Him, dwell in Him. Let His words abide in you, and joy will begin to be the fruit you produce. That joy will be your strength, the strength you need to stand when the weight of the world is pressing against you, the strength you need to throw off the weight and stand until the victory is won. Have a great week. Bye.